Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a challenge that is, well, universally human. It's often invisible and deeply frustrating. I'm talking about that cavernous gap between what we want in life, maybe that's more respect or more support on a project or just more freedom, and what we actually end up with. The real question at the center of this analysis is, I think, pretty profound. Why do we, as capable, intelligent people, so often sabotage our own potential by just waiting? By holding back, by never actually expressing what we truly need?
That internal friction you're describing, that's exactly where the real battle lies. If we strip away all the noise and just look at the core insights from this body of work, the thesis is quite simple, but it's also highly confrontational. It just cuts through all the discussions about luck or entitlement or what we deserve, and it lands on this hard, actionable truth. You do not get what you passively deserve in life. You will only, and I mean only, get what you actively ask for.
That is an uncomfortable truth because it puts the locus of control, entirely in our hands. So if we're unhappy with an outcome, these sources are basically implying that we just haven't mastered the ask.
Precisely. And so our mission today isn't just to summarize this idea, it's to give you a kind of high-level masterclass. A masterclass in shifting that internal operating system. We need to move from that passive silence, which is almost always driven by this, toxic combination of fear, of avoiding rejection, and a subconscious sense of weakness. And we need to move towards strategic clarity, clarity that's driven by a real conviction in our own internal worth. So we're really examining the psychological and the tactical framework that's necessary to move forward by simply and effectively speaking up.
Okay, so let's start there. Phase one, defining that internal barrier. If the solution seems so straightforward on the surface, just open your mouth and ask, why does it feel like climbing Mount Everest for so many of us?
Well, the research is pretty clear that the difficulty isn't external. It's not about your boss or your partner. It's internal.
It points to that fundamental barrier, right? The belief of unworthiness.
Exactly. The sources argue that the biggest change a person can make doesn't start with some external validation. It's not a new degree or a better job title. It starts with the strength of their internal self-worth.
And it's fascinating how deep that feeling of unworthiness can be rooted.
Mhm.
It often comes from, early life conditioning.
Yeah.
Being taught to wait your turn, or that your needs are somehow less important than the group's.
And that conditioning has real-world consequences. The analysis suggests that if you genuinely believe deep down that you don't deserve better, you will subconsciously self-regulate. This isn't just about feeling bad, it's about behavioral constraint.
Right. You accept less compensation, you stay quiet in that critical meeting,
Yeah.
you rationalize your unhappiness by telling yourself, oh, it's fine, I can handle it, even when it's just actively draining your spirit.
And that's the key. It becomes a choice. It's not a necessity forced upon you. It's an internal choice to play small.
Which is such an insidious form of self-sabotage because it hides itself as humility.
It absolutely does. And the sources really emphasize that this internal dialogue, that's the linchpin. If you're constantly hearing that inner voice saying, I'm not good enough, or I'm not ready for that, or, oh, asking for that is just too much trouble for them, well, that kind of persistent negativity, it acts like a gravity well. It keeps you stuck, silenced.
So the first step is just monitoring that.
Yeah.
Noticing those patterns and then actively replacing them.
Yes, replacing them with affirmations of capability. And I know that can sound a bit like self-help hype.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. How do we make sure this reframing, telling ourselves I matter, I have something to offer, is about truth and not just delusional arrogance?
That is a vital distinction. And it's about truth, not hype. See, arrogance comes from a place of insecurity. It's when you need external validation to feel good. True self-worth, the kind that enables an effective ask, comes from a calm, internal acknowledgement of your skills, your past successes, your simple human right to express a need. It's just a necessary correction to years of conditioning that taught us to minimize ourselves.
And the practical result of that belief, or, the lack of it, is so clear in how we manage our lives. If you tolerate bad behavior, if you accept disrespect, what you tolerate really does become your standard.
Exactly. And failing to speak up, even when you're telling yourself you're just keeping the peace in the moment, you're actively lowering that standard. It's a message you send to the world, but I think more importantly, it's a message you are drilling into your own subconscious.
The message being, I accept scraps.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And we need to shift that script. We need to recognize that if we tolerate it, we are actively participating in defining our own minimum viable life.
Okay, so that internal shift in belief is the foundation. That leads us to the next big idea, which is reframing the act of asking itself. So many of us see it as weakness.
It's a destructive association. That feeling that asking for help or support makes you look needy or selfish or maybe incapable.
And I think everyone can identify with that physical resistance.
Yeah.
That tightening in your chest, the dry mouth. We hold back because we're terrified of being seen as a burden. We just imagine the other person rolling their eyes.
Ugh, here they go again.
Right. And that perception is exactly what needs to be dismantled. Because the strategic refutation is simple and it's profound. The truth is the exact opposite of that fear. Weakness stays quiet. Weakness suffers in silence, and that often leads to burnout or breakdown. Asking, especially when you're seeking critical support or admitting confusion, that takes immense strength.
But I do want to introduce some friction here. I mean, how do we draw the line? If someone is constantly asking for things, constantly prioritizing their needs over, say, the team's capacity or a relationship's balance, doesn't that actually become burdensome or selfish?
That's a crucial distinction, and it really comes down to intent and preparation, which we'll get into in the next phase. Selfishness is asking without considering the impact on the other party, demanding something you haven't earned. But true strategic asking, that's what we could call a clarity mandate. A clarity mandate. I like that.
If we don't clearly define our professional and personal needs, we're making our relationships inefficient. We are forcing others to be mind readers. And when they inevitably fail because they can't read our minds, we harbor resentment. That is the definition of weak communication.
So the goal is to shift the mindset. You stop seeing the ask as a disruption, an interruption, and you start seeing it as a building block.
Exactly. The mindset shift has to be radical. Asking must be viewed as a responsibility to yourself to honor your needs, and a responsibility to the relationship to create clear, honest communication. When you step up and speak clearly, you stop apologizing for needing something. You stop shrinking. You're building trust. You're building strength. And strong relationships, whether they're professional or personal, they thrive on clarity, not guesswork.
Okay, so we've established that internal conviction. Now let's move into phase 2, the framework. Let's tackle the physiology of the ask. We all know the signs of nervousness, the adrenaline surge, the shaking voice. Our body sees speaking a need as a danger because our mind is anticipating judgment or rejection, and it triggers a real fight-or-flight response. So how do we train ourselves out of that primal reaction?
This is where we have to move beyond just, abstract encouragement and get into the neurology of it. Research on the amygdala, which is the brain's alarm center, shows its main job is to keep us safe by avoiding painful outcomes. And since rejection is processed by the brain as a form of social pain, it registers similarly to a physical injury. The amygdala just screams, abort, stay silent.
So the strategic approach is to understand that nervousness is a physiological feeling, but it's not a reliable stop sign.
It is not a stop sign, and that's the key. The goal isn't to wait for the fear to vanish, because frankly, that might never happen. The goal is to build the capacity to speak while the fear is still present, to override the alarm system.
And how do we do that?
Through habituation. It's about repeated non-catastrophic exposure to the fear trigger. Look, if you only ask for major things once a year, like a huge raise, the fear is going to be monumental. It's a rare, high-stakes event. But if you start making small, low-stakes asks every day, a micro-ask practice, you train your nervous system. You teach it that opening your mouth, even when you're scared, does not result in social ruin.
It's like strength training for your courage muscle.
It is. And the cost of avoiding that training is incredibly high. If you stay silent, you're training the world to ignore you. You get relegated to these invisible roles. And that silence eats away at your internal peace.
It's a false peace, isn't it? The idea of keeping the peace by not speaking up.
It's the falsest peace there is. It leads to this quiet buildup of frustration, of resentment. Clarity, when it's delivered early and honestly, is the only sustainable path to genuine emotional peace. You have to choose the temporary discomfort of speaking over the long-term corrosion of silence. Every single time you push through that initial fear and state your need, you are building self-respect. You're sending a message to your own brain. My voice matters.
And that builds on this next idea, this concept of self-initiation. We have to talk about the waiting trap, this deep-seated pattern of constantly waiting for validation, for a sign, for permission from some external authority.
Which often comes from our conditioning, right? In school, in early corporate life, we were rewarded for following rules and waiting our turn. But the analysis here reveals a painful truth about adulthood. There is a power vacuum in your life. No one is coming to give you permission. Adulthood fundamentally requires self-initiation. Waiting gives you nothing but doubt and regret. Action is what generates momentum.
We've all seen it. less skilled or, less prepared people get ahead. Not because they were better, but just because they acted. They asked for the promotion. They started the project. They didn't overthink it.
They didn't wait for a grand ceremony of validation.
But hold on, isn't waiting sometimes a sign of wisdom? What about patience? Due diligence. Shouldn't we wait until the time is right or until we're fully prepared? Where's the line between being bold and just being reckless?
That's a critical question. And patience is a virtue when you're working diligently toward a long-term goal. Recklessness is action without any preparation. But the waiting track we're discussing here is different. It's stalling. It's preparation that never ends because it's secretly fueled by a fear of failure.
So the moment you know what you want and you have a clear, respectful plan for how to ask,
Yeah.
any further delay is just fear wearing a disguise.
It's fear masked as prudence. Exactly. Asking should flow from a place of clarity and a belief in your value, not from this, apologetic, fearful position of seeking permission. If you're asking yourself, am I allowed to do this? You have already given away your power.
The goal should be to ask, how can I make this happen?
Precisely. You have to overcome that urge to play it safe. Playing it safe avoids the temporary sting of rejection, but it almost guarantees the higher, long-term cost of regret, the regret of the opportunity you never even tried for. Bold, direct action is the unlock to the next level of your life.
Okay, so this is where we move from the internal psychological battle to the actual strategic framework. Once we accept that we have to initiate, the process has to become intelligent. And the sources point to what they call a pre-ask analysis, understanding the listener before you speak.
This is probably the most profound tactical shift proposed in this entire body of work. Before you launch your request, you have to step out of your own emotional shoes and get into the recipient's mental frame. What do they prioritize? What are their fears? What metrics do they believe define success? Most of us make the mistake of focusing only on our own desired outcome. We deliver this one-sided pitch that, of course, meets resistance.
Because one-sided asking feels inherently confrontational. It only speaks to one person's needs. The smarter approach is meeting them where they are mentally. And that requires reading their patterns. So how do we effectively profile the person we're asking?
Well, we can break down the common decision-making drivers into 4 main profiles. Knowing which one you're addressing lets you tailor everything, not just the content, but the tone, the timing.
What's the first one?
First is the logic-driven profile. These people need facts, concrete proof, and time to process information without feeling pressured. With them, you present data, quantifiable results. You use clear, linear arguments, you never surprise them, and you frame your ask around efficiency or a measurable return on investment.
And what do you avoid?
Avoid emotional appeals, high pressure, or, vague summaries. They hate that.
Okay, profile number 2.
The emotion-driven profile. They prioritize trust, connection, and feeling understood. For them, the relationship and the how of the ask matters more than the raw what. So you build rapport first. You frame the ask around shared values, team morale, or long-term partnership. They need to feel good about saying yes.
And so you'd avoid a cold, purely data-driven presentation in these human context.
Absolutely. Then third, you have the control-focused profile. These people fundamentally dislike being pushed or coerced or told what to do. They need agency in the decision. So with them, you frame your ask by offering choices, even if the choices lead to a similar result. Instead of demanding a specific solution, you present 2 viable options and ask, which of these paths best aligns with our team's goals?
So you're giving them the power to choose. You'd want to avoid any authoritarian language or demanding an immediate answer.
Exactly. And finally, number 4, the peace-focused profile. They actively avoid conflict. Now, this is a tricky one. They might say yes just to keep things calm, even if they internally mean no. And that leads to problems later when they don't follow through.
There's a strategy there.
You give them an easy out. You assure them that you respect their constraints and that a no is an acceptable answer. You frame the ask as a collaboration to find a mutually agreeable solution, not a battle you're trying to win.
This really transforms the ask from a simple plea into a calibrated piece of communication. So if we use that example of asking a manager for a raise, if that manager is logic-driven, you don't talk about how hard you feel you've been working.
No. You present a dossier. Measurable performance gains. Data showing your salary is below the market rate for those specific metrics.
So if that same manager is highly peace-focused and values loyalty,
then you frame the ask completely differently. You highlight your long-term stability and commitment to the team. You explain how securing this raise will remove your internal stress, allowing you to deliver even more consistent value. The request is the same. The packaging has to fit their mental model. And the sources are very clear. This is intelligence and respect. It is not manipulation.
And it makes so much sense. People are so much more likely to say yes when they feel seen, when they
Yes.
feel the reality has been acknowledged.
Yeah. Starting with something like, I know the company is focused on cost savings right now, and I respect that. It builds immediate trust. It shows you're thoughtful, not just desperate. It earns you respect no matter what the final answer is.
So that leads us to the final psychological hurdle in this framework, and it's maybe the biggest one for most people. The fear of hearing the word no.
It's a debilitating fear. And again, the sources point to our deep wiring here. No triggers emotional pain. The brain equates it with rejection, failure, shame. It literally lights up the same regions associated with physical injury. We are hardwired to avoid that sound.
We internalize it. No becomes I am not good enough, or I was wrong to even ask.
And those narratives create this powerful memory loop that keeps us silent the next time. We have to fundamentally train our minds to see no differently. No is not failure, it's information. It means not this person or not this time or not this specific proposal. It provides invaluable clarity and direction.
So we need to reframe no as data, as a powerful piece of feedback that lets us adjust the pitch or change the recipient or just refine the timing.
Absolutely. Think of it like A/B testing for your life. The most successful people have heard no countless times more than their quiet counterparts, but they use it as fuel and feedback. When they receive a no, they should engage in a three-step refinement process. First, gather data. Why did it fall short? Was it timing, budget, resources? Second, reframe. Immediately shift from an emotional reaction to a strategic response. Thank you for the clarity. What would need to change for this to be a yes in 6 months? And third, adjust and try again. Use that feedback to refine the proposal and immediately redirect your energy.
And the sources emphasize that no also acts as a filter, right? It separates the wrong opportunities from the right ones. It tests the strength of your desire.
It does. If one rejection is enough to make you quit, you probably didn't want it badly enough to succeed anyway. And the only way to remove the power of that fear is through that repeated low-stakes exposure we talked about earlier. You normalize the response. The more you hear no strategically, the less scary it feels. You stop reacting emotionally and you start responding strategically. You just have to decide that the what if of a missed opportunity hurts far more than the temporary discomfort of hearing no.
Okay, so that's the framework. Now let's get into phase 3, the application. How do we build a life of action and clarity? And the first rule of execution seems to be the discipline of clarity.
It is. The sources analyze why most asks fail, and it's because people use hints. They drop vague statements. They speak in circles to soften the ask.
Which is really a subconscious effort to protect their ego from an outright rejection, isn't it?
Of course. But we have to understand that vague communication is a symptom of internal confusion or a fear of confrontation. And clarity is the ultimate form of respect. It respects your time, and it respects the time and intelligence of the other person. People trust you when you're direct.
So the process has to start with that internal honesty. You have to define the precise, concrete outcome you need before you even open your mouth.
You can't speak clearly if you haven't thought clearly. And this demands simple, solid sentences. You have to replace vague complaints with specific requests. Let's compare them. An ineffective complaint might be, I feel like no one supports me on this team. It's too much.
Right, it's vague, it's emotional, it just invites the other person to get defensive.
A clear ask, on the other hand, would be, I need a dedicated resource for tasks A and B starting next week. Can we discuss restructuring my workload to focus only on deliverables C and D?
That's specific, it's actionable, it focuses on a solution.
Or in a personal relationship, an ineffective hint. You never seem to notice when I'm struggling. It's accusatory, it's subjective. The clear ask, I'm overwhelmed right now. I need you to take the kids on Saturday so I can have 4 hours of uninterrupted time to myself.
Concrete, a defined outcome. That distinction is the difference between a complaint that leads to an argument and a business proposal that leads to a solution. And it's also crucial to distinguish assertiveness from aggression.
Very. Assertiveness is calm, firm, honest, and respectful. It takes ownership of the communication without demanding a specific outcome. Aggression is emotional, demanding, and often involves blame. Assertive communication is how strong people operate. They choose clarity over comfort.
Which brings us to the engine of change. Practice. The research seems definitive on this. Asking is a skill, and the cure for fear is repetition.
It has to be practiced until it becomes a normal, low-stakes part of your daily rhythm. The mind learns safety through experience, not just thinking about being brave. If you want to feel calm when you ask for something big, you have to train your nervous system with consistent, small exposures.
So we need to institute a daily micro-ask regimen. What would that actually look like in practice?
It just means consciously looking for small opportunities to voice a preference or a need. It could be asking a colleague for specific feedback on a minor point in an email. It could be asking a waiter for a different table. Asking for clarification on a timeline in a meeting. These small acts, when you repeat them, they build a new layer of comfort. They teach your brain, step by step, that nothing terrible happens when you speak up.
And this consistent practice removes the main obstacle, which is that mental pressure, the cycle of overthinking.
Exactly. When asking becomes a habit, you stop treating it like this high-stakes, once-a-year event that requires 2 days of prep and a nervous breakdown. If it's a rare, risky event, your brain magnifies the fear. If you make it normal, it loses its power to make you freeze.
And that normalization leads to emotional freedom. The sources highlight that it helps you stop attaching your self-worth to the answer.
This is the sustainability mechanism. Through practice, you start to accept that no often reflects the other person's reality, their budget, their politics, their own stress, not a judgment of your inherent value. When you detach your ego from the outcome, you achieve emotional balance. The act of asking becomes pure strategy, divorced from emotional turmoil.
So as we start asking clearly and frequently, the next vital step is strategic assessment. Paying attention to how people respond. Their reaction to your clear ask is a measure of how they genuinely value you and your voice.
And this step requires immense wisdom and emotional maturity. A respectful response is clear and honest. It appreciates the courage you showed, even if the answer has to be no. A respectful person doesn't shame you or deflect or try to create guilt for having needs. The way someone responds to your honesty is the truth about what they think about your place in that relationship.
And here's the uncomfortable truth. When you finally speak up and shift that dynamic, some people will get uncomfortable. They might even push back.
Absolutely. Your newfound strength might expose their previous control or their reliance on your passivity. When you start being the person who silently accepts everything, they may try to make you feel like you're being difficult or demanding. But that reaction is purely about their resistance to the change. It's not about the truth of your ask. If someone consistently dismisses or avoids or punishes an honest, prepared ask, that is a clear message. I don't take your words seriously, and I prefer you silent.
And this leads to the hardest part, the redirection. Because strong people do not beg to be heard.
Exactly. They don't waste clarity on those who choose to stay confused about their value. Self-respect dictates that you have to redirect your energy towards spaces, people, and environments where your voice actually holds weight. If the environment resists your growth, wisdom says you move toward people who already respect you. This isn't coldness, it's strategic self-preservation. It's honoring the standard you set for yourself back in phase 1.
You can't grow in a field that actively resists your roots. This brings us to the final combination then, the synthesis of this entire deep dive, the momentum engine. We have to combine the frequency of asking with immediate follow-up action.
Momentum is the great differentiator. It doesn't come from endless planning. It comes from doing. The sources warn against asking without doing because that just allows mental fatigue and doubt to creep back in. Action breaks that cycle. Action clears confusion faster than thinking ever will.
So let's define immediate action. It doesn't mean you get the raise the second you ask. It means, what's the small, concrete step you take in the next hour?
Right. If the answer is no, the immediate action is sending that strategic follow-up email asking about the 6-month timeline, or immediately starting the search for a new opportunity. If the answer is maybe, the immediate action is defining the next meeting, or the deliverables needed for the next pitch. You just stay in motion. This consistency builds momentum, and momentum is not luck. It's the result of repeated, disciplined action.
And this ultimately results in a profound identity shift. You're no longer someone who waits for life to happen to them. You're someone who actively shapes it.
That consistent discipline builds an identity of someone who creates their own path, who doesn't wait for luck, and who trusts their ability to move forward even when they're challenged. You stop getting stuck in that paralyzing fear of what if because you've trained yourself to ask and then move. That self-trust is the ultimate currency.
So if you wait until you feel brave or perfect, that moment may never come. What you need is just the decision to ask directly, boldly, honestly, and then immediately take the next step.
So in summary, mastering the art of the ask really involves 3 phases. First, start with internal belief. Train your mind to feel fundamentally worthy of your needs. Then, master strategic asking by using preparation, clarity, and reframing no as data. And finally, commit to consistent action, using that momentum to build a life that's a true reflection of your potential.
At the end of the day, you can choose to stay quiet and stay stuck, letting your internal standards erode. Or you can start asking, start growing, and start building the life you intended. Your life will only rise as high as your ability to articulate and pursue your needs.
And if clarity begins in the mind, then the greatest risk isn't rejection from others, it's the internal betrayal of knowing what you need and still choosing silence.
So, after this deep dive, the question for you is, what truth are you currently postponing? And what is the single most actionable step you will take now to break that pattern?